So, good morning, Grace family. It's really good to see you. Welcome, everyone joining us online. I am Justin Bluer. I serve as a teaching pastor over a few hills from here at Berean Bible Church. This year, I am also serving on the Grace team on Mondays. And I get to be here, and I love serving with your leadership team. You have a phenomenal team of leaders at this church. I'm sure you know that, though, don't you? So, that was a kind of half-hearted applause, but I'll tell them it was really good. I'll tell them it was good. So let me begin with a question this morning. How are you feeling? Well, that was resounding. Okay, so here's what I want you to do to really draw this out of you. I want you to just I'm going to give you like 60 seconds. Just grab your phone or a piece of paper, pen, something, and I want you to actually write down, okay? Write down, how are you feeling this morning? And I'll be quiet, and I'll give you a chance to answer this question. So, go ahead. Seems like a lot of you are done really fast. Does that mean you're feeling nothing? Okay, so before we talk about it, I want you to do a favor for me. I'd like you to turn to the person near you and just tell them how you're feeling. And don't change your answer now, because you have to tell someone, okay? So go ahead and tell someone around you how you're feeling. Okay, you can't be feeling that much. Okay, you can stop now. Now, did anyone find that hard? Just be honest. Did anyone find that hard? Some of us found that hard. I know some of you are like, okay, how do I feel? I feel annoyed that you would ask me that question this time of the morning. All right, good grief, right? I'm tired, I'm stressed, just let the caffeine kick in a little longer. If you had asked me that question just about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had an answer for you because I had no idea. I had no idea how I was feeling at any given time. So, a few months ago, I gave a talk at the Northeast Leadership Summit, which you hosted here at Grace. Was anyone there at the Northeast Leadership Summit? Okay, a few of you were, so you recognize what we're talking about. And I'm sorry you're going to hear it again, because Pastor Dan, when he was designing this series on lies we believe, he said, will you please come and share this message with the whole church? Because I think a lie we believe in the church is that self-awareness doesn't matter. And I'll tell you, I believed that lie for much of my life. In fact, until the last few years, I felt like that's just silly to focus on how I'm feeling or how others are feeling. It's kind of like navel-gazing, and ain't nobody got time for that. Right? Some of us are actors, we're doers, we want to get stuff done, we're motivated by accomplishment, and so to take time to actually process and think through emotions and feelings for ourselves and others, it feels like just a total waste of time. That was me. So they've actually done studies on this, and they've shown that most guys in America are only aware of two emotions. And that would be they are either angry or frustrated. And these are our go-to for most of us guys. If I'm feeling something negative, I either feel angry or I feel frustrated, or I'm angry that you're frustrated. Now, it's funny, there are many, many women who struggle with this same thing. And what's ironic is there are way more emotions than those two. There's dozens here, there are dozens and dozens more. And what's funny, though, is that many of us have no idea either what we are experiencing or what the people around us are experiencing. So, you might be thinking, okay, I don't really understand what this has to do with anything. Okay, so let's talk about that. In the church, there is more research that shows that church leaders especially struggle with something called traumatic stress. And they struggle with it at a rate that is higher than in the military. And so when they survey people who are Jesus followers or who are leading, who are volunteering, serving, many of you serve, volunteer. Listen, if you are a parent and you are a Christian leader, okay? There are these findings that there is this tremendous amount of weight and struggle. And you heard that in the Grace story this morning. When the world goes sideways, Christians often feel left behind because the world's making decisions that don't align with our values. Anyone else experience this on a regular basis? Turn on the news, watch it for 5 minutes, and you'll experience this. And so there's this disconnect between us and the world. And with that weight and that strain that we face as a follower of Jesus comes this desire to numb that pain. And so what followers of Jesus do wholesale across our country is they're numbing that pain through unhealthy behaviors or even addictive substances. So substance abuse, pornography, suicide, these are all off the charts in the church. And you have to take some time perhaps to stop and question and say, why are we so unhealthy? And is it possible part of the reason we're so unhealthy is because there's something broken inside of us that we're not even aware of? And it's really easy to point it out in other people. I know that boss has issues, but it's really hard to see it in ourselves. And so today I want to look a little closer at it because we're going to look at something called EQ. Has anyone ever heard of EQ? Okay, a few of you have. Let me define it for you. It's simply emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. What is this talking about? Well, first of all, let me give you a little background on this. I have good news and bad news related to your EQ, your emotional intelligence. Which do you want first? Why would everyone want the bad news first? I've never understood that. But okay, you want the bad news first. Here you go. So the bad news is simply this. Our EQ scores, you can actually take a test and score your EQ. Our EQ scores are all different. Every person has a different EQ score. And the reason that's bad news is because the vast majority of people have very low EQ scores. When I took my first EQ test about 6 years ago, I was stunned to find out that there's two parts to the test, and the one part of the test I barely even registered as living and breathing. And I'm an educated person, I have a few advanced degrees, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Something failed in the education process, and I had no idea. And this set me on a journey to discover what was so wrong. So the challenge is that all of us have a different EQ. And that might not be good news for most of us. But here's the good news. You ready for some good news? Okay, here's some good news. EQ is not fixed like IQ. So IQ is something you're born with. It doesn't change. So if you're a kid and you take an IQ test, it's going to be the same as when you're 70, 80 years old. It doesn't fluctuate. You can get educated. You can get a lot of skills and experience. You can go through life, and your IQ score tends to not change. And I really don't know who to blame for that other than that's the hand God dealt you. Or maybe your parents' genetics dealt it to you. I don't know who we blame for our IQ scores, but they're fairly fixed. EQ is not that way. EQ can and should change. Now, here you go. If you look at your life, your IQ is what people see, but your EQ is the more important part of who you are. And if I'm going to define it for you a little bit better, IQ has to do with your brain, your intelligence, and it's fixed, but EQ has much more to do with your heart, the essence of who you are. So when they've done studies on this, they've shown that EQ is responsible for about 80% of your success or failure in life. IQ is only responsible for about 20%. So what is this thing that is such a big part of who we are that gets very little talk or discussion time, especially in the church, and yet might be responsible for our success in life and our health in relationships? What is this thing? Well, I'm glad you asked. That was a really good question. So let me give you an example from my personal life, because this is an area that I've been working on, especially when I realized that I was miserable at half of this part of emotional intelligence. So it's something I've been working on. So I'll give you an example from a few months ago. I was in bed with my wife late at night, and this is not about to get embarrassing, don't worry. And we're talking, and she asked me the question. She says, honey, NLS, the Northeast Leadership Summit's coming up, and it's going to be a busy weekend for us. What are we going to be doing, and who's going to be taking care of the kids, and how are we going to get from place to place that weekend? So let me just unpack behind that. So she was about to leave on a trip when she asked that question. When she came back, I was then going to leave on a trip to Israel for 10 days, which was canceled for obvious reasons. The attacks were about to happen. And so there were some major trips we were about to go on. We weren't about to cross paths for a number of weeks. And we were talking about a big weekend 4 weeks away. Here's what I knew about the weekend 4 weeks away. I was speaking on this subject at the Northeast Leadership Summit. It's a subject I had never talked about before. It's a subject I'm still learning about. So I'm passionate, but I knew I needed to do a lot more study and research and preparation. But I wasn't sure when I was going to get those talks prepared. And on top of it, I'm a chaplain in our local fire department, and our fire chief was getting married the same weekend as NLS. In fact, the same day as NLS, and he asked if I would do his wedding, and I said, of course, I'd be happy to. And so it's at a resort in another part of the state, and so I would be speaking here, so trying to go to that, and then the night before NLS would be the rehearsal in that part of the state. And then I realized I had booked myself to preach in Binghamton the day after, and then I had booked myself to speak at a conference in Western New York the next week for 5 sessions for camp leaders from around the country. I didn't have any of those prepared either. Now, that's not bad EQ, that's just bad IQ. That's stupid. I can't fix that. But something happened as I'm laying there in bed that night, and my wife's asking me to talk about our plans. I felt something rising up in me, and I just looked at her and I said, honey, just thinking about that weekend makes me feel so stressed, and I'm too tired right now to make a good decision. Could we talk about this tomorrow? And she looked at me and she said, sure. And she gave me the grace I asked for, and we rolled over, and I tried to go to sleep and power my brain down. Now, I know that might seem small and silly and stupid to you, but that's a big deal to me. I knew how I was feeling. And I knew that it wouldn't be wise in that moment to try to wrestle through a decision that I couldn't make. Now, if I had tried to pin down how I was feeling a few years before that, I would have said, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated by my schedule. I'm frustrated by my lack of time to prepare for anything. Right? Or I'm angry, or I don't know. And who might I have taken that out on? My wonderful wife was just trying to figure out our plans. And instead, in a rare moment of high EQ, God helped me to identify how I was feeling and ask for grace. And when I asked for grace, guess what I got? I got grace from my wife. So that was one moment, and I like to highlight that because I get it wrong almost every other time. But that moment, for a brief moment, I got it right. So maybe you're thinking right now, as you're listening to me, you're like, holy cow, did I just walk into like a psychology conference? What is this? Because that's exactly what I would have been thinking 10 years ago, is what is this discussion about emotions and feelings and emotional intelligence? I would not have been comfortable with it. I would not have got it. I would not have been tracking with what I'm saying right now. So if that's you, I get you. Totally. So let's first understand that many people are unhealthy because of low EQ. So it's important that we take a look at this because it's time for the church in America to try to get a little more healthy. Anyone else agree? I think it's time for us in upstate New York, people that see the sun about 5 days a year. We struggle up here. And it would be really good if we learned how to get healthy. And so I want to say something right now. I think that the reason we're so unhealthy so often is because of low EQ. Now, I don't want you to mishear me. I'm not saying it's the most important thing. Your relationship to God is the most important thing. Amen? But a close second is your relationship to yourself and your relationship to those around you. And that's what we focus on today. So let me explain a little bit more of EQ. EQ has actually two parts. The first part is self-awareness. How aware are you in any given moment of any day of the way that you're feeling? It's not just an awareness, but it's an ability to appropriately manage those emotions. So that's the first part of EQ. This is the part of EQ that I was really rotten at. I was like the typical person where I only knew if I was angry or frustrated. And any other thing, I just put it under those categories. I'm angry or I'm frustrated. And so if you want to see someone with high self-awareness, watch any reality show on TV. Because directors select people who are high at this. And they sit in a chair and they look at a camera and they tell you exactly how they felt when this person said this or did this. And some of us watch that like, what is their problem? Right? Can we just move on? You are very, very aware. So what's funny is there's an awareness that we have when we see someone who's incredibly self-aware that you could take this too far. Those who are so self-aware that it consumes them, they are actually toxic. And that's why reality shows have such good ratings, because we love to watch people self-destruct. And it's hilarious to watch the meltdowns as people explain how they feel about every given thing. So this concept of self-awareness, while if you take it too far, you're toxic, you're called a drama king or a drama queen, most of us don't fall into a risk category. In fact, I'll tell you something crazy about this. 95% of people think that they are highly self-aware. 95%. While in reality, only 10 to 15% of us are. So, if you think you're highly self-aware, you might be lying to yourself. And if so, then I hope you listen to what we're going to talk about next. Now, the second part of self-awareness is others' awareness. And that's the ability to discern and feel the emotions of others and help to appropriately manage them. Some people are really strong in this specific area. And what was weird is I was barely on the chart at all for self-awareness, but I was off the chart for others' awareness. So it set me on this journey of figuring out why. Why am I so lopsided when it comes to this? So I'm going to share just a little bit of my story, just so that you can maybe think through yours. So I grew up in a little family of 16 kids. 2 of them didn't make the picture. They weren't in town. But 16 kids. I am number 6 of 16. I'm the oldest of the second batch. We have multiple batches. And so kind of what that meant, my folks have adopted kids from all around the world. It was a really cool family to grow up in. But as the oldest of the second batch, it kind of meant I was a middle child who had some extra responsibility. And because by nature I'm a people pleaser, I wanted to be liked by my older siblings, I wanted to be liked by my younger siblings, and I wanted to be liked by my parents. And because of that, I developed really strong antenna for how other people felt. And I would play the role of peacemaker and negotiator. And when there would be siblings conflicting, I would try to step in and I would listen and I would try to create harmony or an agreement or a solution. And so I lived a lot of my life as this kid who wanted to be liked, and I became very others aware. But the problem is, I almost turned off my self-awareness because it didn't really matter. It didn't matter to me how I felt. What mattered is how others felt. And so God has used that in my life to help me be good at discerning people and leading teams and counseling. I love those things because I love reading and discerning and helping people. But it made me really, really, really weak at understanding and managing myself and my emotions. And what that led to by 2015 is it led to burnout. And I experienced the classic period of burnout that many of you have or maybe even are experiencing now. And it's where everything kind of goes numb, and you know something's wrong, but you just want to avoid people. You have no energy. You know something's wrong. And there's different levels of burnout. And in that burnout season, I realized, okay, there's something broken inside of me, and I can't just fix this now by focusing on everyone else. Now I got to actually focus on what's wrong in here, because something's broken. And I know something's broken, but I don't understand myself at all. And what I found out in that season of brokenness and burnout is burnout people are really unhealthy and toxic to the family that they're in. They're toxic to their church. And I don't ever want to go back there. So it set me on this process of discovering what is going on inside of me and how can I understand that better so I never walk this road again. Because I want to be healthy, because my family deserves a healthy dad and a healthy husband. My church deserves a healthy leader. And I wasn't. So let me give you a little case study that may put a little skin on this, because I've been talking in a lot of abstracts up to this point. Here's a case study. Let me tell you about a true story with a father and son. This was many years ago, but there was a father and son, and the father, he was deeply in touch with his own emotions. He was like one of those reality show contestants, deeply in touch with his own emotions. And when he felt a certain way, he knew it, and he usually acted on it. So when he was angry, or when he was romantic, or when he was sad or musical, or whatever the case was, hungry, he knew it, and he acted on it. And it led him to be a very unpredictable person. He actually ended up killing dozens of people. He even killed his lover's husband. And his family, they were about as dysfunctional as they come. His kids didn't respect him. His wives were often left alone. One of his wives battled such intense bitterness towards him that she became estranged from him because of it. All of his wives actually abandoned him or felt abandoned by him when, as an older man, he found a young lady to be his bedmate to keep him warm at night. His family was so dysfunctional that rebellion and rape and murder were just hallmarks of their family. Now, what if I told you that that man is also one of the most famous fathers in history? And what if I told you that you probably aspire to be like him? You've probably even memorized some of his famous quotes and songs. Anyone have any idea who I'm talking about? Talking about King David, that guy who killed the giant Goliath. When you actually dive into the details of David's story, David's known as a man after God's own heart, and we kind of idolize him and admire him for it, but we tend to whitewash his real story. When you read the details of his story, that's not a story you'd ever want to live. You'd never want any of your kids to live the story of David. Now, I said it's a father-son story. Who's the son? It was actually his third son. He was a talented and handsome young man named, anyone know? Absalom, the guy with the good hair. Okay? Absalom. Now, he's a villain in our stories, but when you actually read the text, when you read the story, and it's in 2 Samuel, and I hope I'm whetting your appetite to dive in and read this full story because it's crazy, tragic, and it's a lesson to be learned. This third son was an incredible young man, and he would have made an awesome king because he had what his dad lacked. And you know what that was? He had a deep awareness of others. He would sit at the gates of the city and he would listen to people. He would solve their problems. And Scripture records that he won the hearts of his nation. But what he lacked is what his dad had. He lacked self-awareness. He lacked such self-awareness that he didn't know how arrogant he was. And he felt like he'd be a better king than his dad. And so one day, he dumped his dad. He overthrew his dad. He set himself up as the new king. And he did then some shockingly immoral things in public to defy his dad, who he was very bitter about and estranged from. That story just kept getting worse and worse because there was a tragic accident when his dad's friends finally tried to put a stop to his his rule, and it led to him being killed and dying. And his life ended, his dad was never the same, and his nation was never the same after that. What's interesting when you read the story is you realize that these two guys, man, they had the two different parts of EQ, right? David was so strongly self-aware. Absalom was so strongly others-aware. If they had grown in one area of EQ, they would have been a phenomenal king, both of them. If they had just been humble enough to team up, they would have been an incredible team, and their nation would have been run and led by such healthy leaders. But that's not how the story goes. And instead, you find dysfunction and arrogance and estrangement. And you think if David, if he was only a better dad, if Absalom was only a better son, but we'll never know how that story went. We'll never know what would have happened if they had been healthy. So instead, another one of David's sons stepped up and became king. His name was Solomon, and he was a lot like his daddy. He was very aware of his own needs and urges and wants. In fact, he gave in to almost all of them, and he lived a life giving in to all of his own urges. He eventually, by the end of his life, had married 700 times. I don't know of anyone that's ever topped that. He had 300 extra women on the side. He pursued power and pleasure and popularity. He gave in to everything that he wanted. And at the end of his life, he sat down and he wrote a journal called Ecclesiastes about his folly and how life is worthless and meaningless when you just give in to your own urges and desires. He was gifted with this divine wisdom, and he lived so foolishly for himself. This case study, if you look at David and Absalom and Solomon, you realize all three of them were incredibly brilliant men. They were incredibly talented leaders, but they were unhealthy. And their shattered lives and marriages and families scream at us from a distance, don't follow us. Live different from us. Now there's a crazy twist to their story. Because centuries later, from that dynasty, which after Solomon blew it and died, the dynasty was really destroyed, the kingdom was split, the legacy of David's dynasty was tarnished. But a few hundred years later, from David's line would come a new king. And this new king, he would live a life very different from the previous kings. One where he didn't live for his own power or popularity or pleasure. One where he was so self-aware that he decided he was going to serve others and meet their needs because they were more important than his own needs and wants. And instead of accepting a crown of gold, he accepted a crown of thorns. He was more motivated by the needs of the people around him, and this left him naked and bleeding on a block of wood alongside a public highway as he took the arrogance of David and Absalom and Solomon and you and me on himself. And 3 days later, he walked out of his grave and he launched a new movement. And for 20 centuries, people have been calling themselves little Christs or Christians because we're saying we are people who want to follow that example. Not Absalom, not David, not Solomon. I want to follow the example of Jesus. The one who had the ultimate self-awareness and the ultimate others awareness. The one who understood his own pain and when he needed to rest, but he always was willing to care and focus on those around him. If you want to get healthy, study the example of Jesus of Nazareth. There is no more emotionally intelligent person in history than him. He didn't just ace the test, but he wrote it. Jesus said this, "Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear." Because he knows how common it is for people to plug their ears and not listen. We struggle to listen to God, we struggle to listen to others, and we struggle to listen to our own souls. And we often, when we hear things that don't fit with what we think, we throw them out. And Jesus says, if you have ears to hear, hear. So I want to ask you this morning, are you willing to take the time to ask questions that are hard about the condition of your own soul? Are you willing to ask this question, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Ooh, that's a good question. Let me give you a list of questions that Ryan Leake published. Questions about being on the other side. Have you ever asked these questions? What's it like to get emails and text messages from me? What's it like to be parented by me? Just ask your kids, they'll tell you. What's it like to be on the other side of my Instagram or Facebook comments? What's it like to be married to me? What's it like to be in meetings with me? What's it like to work with me? What's it like to live next door to me? What's it like to be on the sidelines of my kids' games with me? What's it like to be coached with me? What's it like to be on a team with me? What's it like to travel with me, to be the person in the plane next to me? What's it like to do a holiday with me? What's it like to be on a date with me? What's it like to be my friend? When we stop and take the time to ask questions, say, okay, I have ears to hear, I am going to hear what the people around me are saying about me. Because more than likely, there's things that I don't see about myself. And here's the funny thing. People quickly forget what you said to them, but they never forget how you made them feel. And a healthy person wants to become aware of that. They know, a healthy person knows that you have strengths, you have weaknesses and shortcomings, and that you make people feel a certain way. A healthy person wants to know what that is, because that matters. So when you begin to ask for feedback, you just need to know, when you ask for feedback on how people experience you, it's not for the faint of heart, because you're going to hear things that you are not going to like. And it's hard, and it's painful to hear things that we don't like. Pastor Dan had me lead a 360 evaluation process for him recently, and he asked all the staff here to give feedback anonymously that came through me, and I stripped everyone's names out of it and gave it back to him. And there was all this feedback that he's like, okay, it's painful, some of it, but I need to hear it, and I want to hear it, because if I'm going to be a better leader and a better Jesus follower, I need to hear how I make other people feel. I need to hear what it's like to work and live and do life on the other side of me. Every week now, I meet with 2 older men who speak into my life in this area, and they have permission to ask me any question. They know my weaknesses, they're very aware of that, and they have permission to get in my grill. Early Tuesday morning, I meet with one gentleman. Tuesday afternoon, I meet with another one. And I'm telling you what, I've been in ministry for decades, and I still need to meet with those guys every week, because there's things that leak out of my heart that I don't even know are there. And I just think about how different David's life in ministry might have been if he had had regular check-ins with Nathan, the prophet of Israel. He didn't have a check-in with Nathan until after he had gone sideways and destroyed his family. How different would he have been? You say, well, why does EQ matter so much? Because unless I know myself truly and know others correctly, I'm never going to know if I'm healthy or if you're healthy, and I'm never going to be able to change that. And so if we care about being healthy, we're going to care about this. So for those of you who want to dig deeper, what's the wildly important goal for Grace Christian Fellowship this year? It is to take one step closer to Jesus. So let me give you a few options. Maybe this is your one step for the year. Here you go. I want to recommend a few books. In fact, there's 4 of them I want to recommend that are really, really helpful when it comes to EQ. You ready? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Don't know if you've ever heard of these books, but they're really, really good. And you can read secondhand accounts of Jesus from guys who were really close to him. And they knew what it was like to be on the other side of Jesus. And if you read it with fresh eyes, and you read it with the perspective of how aware was he, and how aware was he of others, it's phenomenal to read, especially his buddy John, who was his closest friend. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Listen, in your pew, there's Bibles there. I talked to Dan this morning. He said, yes, they are to give away. So take those Bibles home with you. Not all of them. I mean, take one or give them. But go ahead if you don't have one. Take one home, read it, and study Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and look at the greatest example who has ever lived. His name is Jesus. Because here's what I know. Inside you and me lurks a David and a Solomon and an Absalom. And I don't want to be like them. And I'm telling you, they're screaming from their graves, don't be like us. Follow Jesus, the ultimate leader. If you want to take another step, and maybe you'd like to take an EQ test even, this is a great book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Great book to just study this further and learn about an area that maybe you've just not ever known anything about or ever studied. And it may just open your eyes. But here's what I want to leave you with, right? How are you feeling? This is what we began with. It's important that you know the answer to that. Because I'm telling you, if you're not in touch with your own soul, you just need to know stuff's going to come out and you're going to have absolutely no ability to manage that. You're going to be a lot like David. And the bigger question that Jesus focused on for most of his life is, how are those around you feeling? It's important that we stop and take the time to know. Would you bow with me in prayer as we wrap up this morning? My friends, I think personally that it's time for the Church of Jesus Christ to not just survive, but to thrive. And I don't think that happens until we get healthy. And I know in my own life, this is an area where I've had to learn what it even looks like to be healthy, because I was so ignorant and unaware. And I just didn't even have time for stuff that I felt like was useless. So here's something that David wrote that I want to leave with you. David wrote when he was battling with his unhealthy soul. He wrote this: "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." Point out, here's what he said that was beautiful. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. That comes from Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Maybe that's your next step, is just write out those verses and pray them this week. God, point out anything in me that offends you. And maybe you'll take a next step and say, I need to go ask some people in my life. What's it like on the other side of me? And I'm going to give them permission. I'm going to take them out for coffee, and I'm going to say, listen, will you let me know what it's like to be my friend, my coworker, my boss, my kid, my wife? Will you just honestly tell me? I won't fight you. I won't argue with you. I just am willing to have ears to hear. And then you get their feedback, and then you go meet with God and say, okay, God, point out anything in me that offends you. Test me and know my thoughts. Father, thank you for loving us so much that you want us to be healthy. Thank you for sending us Jesus, not just to forgive us of our sins and give us a home in heaven, but also to give us an example to follow. And God, I pray that we can learn from the example of the greatest person to ever walk planet Earth. Thank you for caring so much about us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.